Raisin, for a very nice introduction. And thank you, Professor Yuan, for inviting me over to share my experience with colleagues at the Xi'an University and the time to meet a lot of my old friends in Hong Kong. Thanks a lot for hosting me for this month and the early 2 weeks of next year. Okay, today is a series of lecture, three-part series lecture, and this is the first part on evidence-based practice. So on December 11 today, we will talk about conceptual framework of EBP, and then we have about a week to digest, to think about all the models that have been put forward as a guideline to what we are going to do next, which is the next Friday. Hopefully it's not as cold as today. On the 21st of December, we will be talking about how to translate research evidence into practice. And then the next year, and then we have a nice Christmas and New Year. Then we come back on the 8th of January. We'll be talking about interdisciplinary research in evidence-based practice and formation of research cluster and research team and collaborative research. So today we are going to talk about conceptual framework of evidence-based practice. I think every one of you have a very nice pamphlet that's put together by the Center of the Center of Evidence-Based Practice. And all the materials are nicely summarized with colorful pictures and a lot of pointers. It makes my work easier, at the same time more difficult, because I probably will not be repeating most of the stuff here, but this pamphlet summarizes all the major things that we're going to talk about within these three workshops. So take home and then read about it. It's nicely put together, a lot of work. Nice, well done, Joseph and his team. Okay, so without further delay, so let's go to what is evidence-based practice. The first few slides I'll be talking here. But as we go into different models, there are a lot of small prints and points that I have to move over there. So you'll be just seeing the back or maybe the side of me later on, okay? So it would not be as exciting as some of you would expect it, because this particular workshop will form the basis of what we're going to do next week. That's the excitement, translating all the evidence-based best practice into our clinical practice or in our practice. So I think all of us, probably, or most of us, will be familiar with the term evidence-based practice. This term is new, it's not new, and I only heard of it after I come back to Hong Kong when I am doing practice. That it's been around for as early as in the 1970s by Dr. Archie Cochrane. Okay, I have difficulty to pronounce his name. He's a very famous researcher. The Cochrane Foundation hosts a lot of meta-analysis, randomized controlled trial. That's the center for. So it's the term that was introduced by him because he wants to, based on his practice on critical review of research. So he emphasized his very emphasis on randomized controlled trial, RCTs. Again, this term was not taught while I was in graduate school. So it was all learned after I graduated from my PhD. Okay, so this is a lifelong learning for all of us. So it's applied to healthcare, the medical field first, and it's well taken, well accepted in the medical field, and then it's spread over to the social science probably a decade later. And in addition to medicine, other disciplines also take on this concept of evidence-based practice. And each discipline has its own definition. And some are longer and some are shorter, but basically it includes the three key components that I'll talk about in the next slide. Well, let's just, for the sake of interest, just look at how each discipline defined evidence-based practice. Let's look at our grandfather, so to speak, medicine. They refer it as the conscious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of the individual patient. It means integrating individual clinical experience with the best available external clinical evidence from systematic research. Basically, today we are going to go into each word of these definitions. What's evidence and what is the best evidence? What is external evidence, internal evidence? How about psychology? Psychology is probably the first discipline in social science to adopt this concept, although the adoption comes very slow. Okay, well, it's an APA in 2005. It has earlier definition, but this one is the latest, and it has not changed since. And shorter, the integration of the best available research with clinical expertise in the context of patient characteristics, culture, and preferences. So it has an additional emphasis on the patient characteristics, culture, and preferences. Perhaps let's move to look at our colleagues in education. Sometimes we will feel that, what's evidence-based practice to do with education? Actually, it has a lot. So with our education colleague, it defined evidence-based practice as a paradigm by which education practitioners make informed decisions on educational interventions, policy, practices, and programs by using empirical evidence. Okay, so that's how our colleagues in different disciplines defined. So we'll go a little bit, look at a little detail as to what evidence practice. It's not the same as research. Actually, evidence-based practice is talking about the application of research, the best research into our practice. It's not talking about research. So a lot of our colleagues later on will talk about resistance and barriers to adopt this EBP. They will say, I'm not familiar with any research. I'm not doing research. I'm just doing practice. But EBP is not talking about research. It's talking about how we evaluate, how we source our research, and how we evaluate the research, and how we apply the research in making decisions in our practice. So the key concept of EBP is the best evidence that we talk about, expertise, the individual clinician's expertise and the discipline's expertise, and the patient characteristic, the patient values. And it de-emphasizes what we have been in the years, the apprenticeship, okay? In psychotherapy as well, in some of the medical procedures, in the past, we talk about there's you learn it from your masters, you learn it from your teachers, and we call it apprenticeship. So there's it depends on which supervisors you follow, and they have a unique idea what should be done and what's the best way to do it. And every supervisor said, my way is the best way. And I'm the only one who can do it. And there's no documentation and very few evaluation as to what they are doing. But this has been the old practice. And nowadays, even though you're not talking about evidence-based practice, we talk about documentation, manualize, things like that. So EBP itself de-emphasizes ritual, isolated, unsystematic clinical experiences, and options and tradition as basis for practice. So the arguments for psychologists, whether psychotherapy is an art or a science. So it's EBP leaning towards more to adopt psychotherapy as a form of science. Art is very subjective. It depends on who is receiving the therapy and who is evaluating it. So it's very subjective, And the method of delivering the practice or the therapy varies with the individuals, therapists, and varies with the supervisors, instruction. So, so evidence-based practice help the social science field to argue that we are a form of science. So it basically helps us to position ourselves as social science. Because if I remember, okay, when I was still at HKSYU in the mid-90s, where Charles Gao was our vice chancellor back then, and when he first came, the first 2 years, he visited every department, and he come to psychology. With all due respect to him, he totally disagree with us that psychology is social science. It's arts, okay? It's not even social science. It's even that difficulty to argue with the pure science that social science is a form of discipline that bridge towards, that has scientific foundations to it. And using scientific foundation to understand social issues and social behavior. So that's the background. So this is the thing that EPP, in a nutshell, is best the integration of best research, evidence, clinical experience, and patient value. The center, okay, sorry for moving so fast, not to scare you. Okay, how come it's so fast? It's just one touch. This is the point. This is the EPP that we're talking about. Okay, so why are we emphasizing on the use of EPP? Why everybody was talking about EPP? Because we are more focusing on, ensuring the quality and safety in our service delivery. In terms of my discipline, psychotherapy has been a lot of argument. Is it good for the better or for the worse for the client? And a lot of the classic books talk about, harmful effect of psychotherapy. It's not that rosy that it's not clear to what extent, it's good for the client and whether it's good or whether it's bad. So, of course, when they're delivering service delivery, we want to ensure that it's safe and it's of good benefit to the client. And then the second factor is the information overload for everybody, the same as for experts. Okay, immense growth of new knowledge available to practitioners. Basically, it's not just to practitioners, to everybody. Information is so immense nowadays. So together with it, there is a rapid decline in the lifetime of knowledge. So basically, in our times, they said, whatever you learn in a PhD is no use after 10 years. Okay, now it's 5 years. Maybe 2 years later, it's 3 years. So in our discipline, I think in all of the discipline, you always a handbook of what, okay? And in the past, it's 10 years, one edition. Nowadays, it's almost 5 years, then a new edition, a handbook of, classroom management handbook. So the lifetime of any knowledge is 5 years only. So it's a rapid decline. So there's so many information, and the information gets so quickly become obsolete. That means more and more new information is coming. So as a practitioner, how are we going to adapt to it? So that also in that sense, whatever we learn in school is no longer useful nowadays. That's why in all professionals, we adopt a continual education policy in order for you to be registered or licensed in that profession. So continual education, and also that means that we have to have look into more evidence and have the more tendency and more likely to integrate the best evidence, the latest evidence into our practice. But then the thing is that we found out there's generally a decline in integrating new evidence into clinical practice. Because we know there's new knowledge, but there's also a hesitation to introduce this new knowledge into our practice. because it's always safe to use the traditional method. Okay, so if a new thing's coming up, are we going to adopt it? And professionals tend to be slow, inertia in adopting new evidence, new research evidence. For example, the last lecture next year for my visit is on trauma psychology, how to help people who underwent traumatic experience, like the traffic accident yesterday. So in the past, there's a certain form, traditional form, and then new forms coming up, new way of psychotherapy dealing with this type of client coming up. And there's so many question marks as whether this new things is going to help our clients. So questions being asked, and then research has been done, and then it takes 20 years, an average of 20 years, to make a new psychotherapy, a new form of psychotherapy into an accepted evidence-based psychotherapist. So it takes that long in the past. But nowadays, it's kind of shortened the journey a little bit. So for any new form of psychotherapy, it takes about 10 years for people to register as an evidence-based practice. So there's a delay in integrating new evidence into clinical practice. So there are new things coming up, but then we are still using the old method, right? So it's also another factor is consumer pressure, expectation that they want to be part of the decision making. So they want to know how you make the decision. How do you decide whether to open surgery for abdomen to get the gallstone out, or just a microsurgery using a laser, just a small hole, and using a 3D, virtual reality, looking at TV and then take my gallbladder and gallstone out. Okay, so they want to take part in all this kind of decision making. So I'm going to introduce 5 or 6 models, conceptual models, and then a simplified model that's included in your pamphlet. So where does the model in the pamphlet come from? Probably, as a matter of, simplifying, taking the essence of all these previous models. Okay, so whatever models you're talking about, basically, it talks about identification. You have to identify your problem. What is it that you want to deal with? And what is it that you already know that is a usual way of dealing with this problem? Okay, you can't be just a blank question mark. You need to have a general idea of what has been done and what is usually being done to this problem. Okay, and then search for the best evidence. Search for what other people is doing and what research concerned about is related to this problem. And then evaluating all the evidence that's presented to you about how they deal with this problem or how they manage with this problem. And then that's the decision-making time, whether you make any change or status quo to your original thinking about what you are going to do. Okay? And then after making a decision, whether there's change, refinement, or whatever, or status quo, then you implement your decision, whatever you've decided. And then after conducting deliver the service, deliver the practice. And during the process, and there's one very important aspect in EBP, is the evaluation of what you are doing and document what you evaluate. What's your outcome? They also separate it into 2 parts, the process as well as the outcome, the end point. What is going on during the service delivery period? And then what happened to the end of the delivery of the service? So whatever models that we are looking at, we are having all these common steps. So if we put it in the diagram, it's very nice. You Google and they are there. Okay, nice diagram, formulating your clinical question or your question, your practice question, or your client's problem. Okay, searching for evidence. How people, evidence include internal evidence, external evidence. Other than searching for research, we also collect opinions from experts as well. So searching for evidence, evaluating, waiting for appraising the evidence, applying the evidence to your practice, and then evaluating your practice. So whatever models that we're talking about, that I move over here, and then take this with me. Okay, so can you see me there? Okay. Hi. Okay, so these are the models that we'll be looking at. These are the models initially generated from the medical field. So they will be particularly referred to clinical intervention with a clinical client of a clinical problem. But they are, you see that most of them been modified recently, and some of them have been heavily modified to be applied to social science, particularly to the field of social work and to psychology. So the very first one is Stetler's model, as early as 1994, and there's several revisions. And Roseworth and Larraben's model also is, if you search for animal evidence-based model, they will talk about these models. And Iowa model has been out of favor now. It's usually will be very, favorable to clinicians. So it's losing, but still people are still talking about it, using it. The ACE STAR model, Academic Center for EBP STAR model, it's 2004, it's very new. And John Hopkins model is heavily utilized now. And it's so good that 2007, a small modification, and the good about this one is that they have divided the whole process in 20-something steps. So basically, all the 5 key components, each component, they will divide small steps that you can follow. So it's like a manualized, model that you can follow in making your decision, in deciding on your evidence-based practice. So we will basically, next workshop, we will utilize this model as well as a simplified model to translate our question into evidence, based practice. Okay, so I will talk about John Hopkins model, but the details will leave at the next, workshop. Usually, when we do about this, it's one whole day workshop, so that we introduce all the models, and then in the afternoon there will be exercise. So everyone, we will give examples, and then we give all the worksheets for people to work on. But then we divided, the way that we divide the workshops is, one whole day, so it's 6 hours. And then, but I guess, the way that we divide into 3 workshops is good, that we have all the background conceptual model, and then next week we talk about the step-by-step. But unfortunately, we probably will not have time to really do the exercise. Exercising in this working model is a very heavy component of EBP training. Okay, so, but I don't think we have the time. We have the exercise this time, and in this workshop, we're looking at all this model. So, and the last one is a very new, I keep pressing on the wrong button. Okay. This one. I intend to use this. So the last one is ARCC model, Advancing Research and Clinical Practice Through Close Collaboration. This one is very, very hot now because it has step-by-step of how to help people to build interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary collaboration in dealing with a clinical problem using evidence-based practice. So let's go to the grandfathers. May not be grandfathers. Okay, this is the very first model. You can see later on, whatever model is basically refinement or adding more detail to this, grandfather model. So it's one of the original models. It's as early as 1994, and they keep revising. It starts off with a decision-making process for individual practitioner to consider. But after this model, basically all the model also take into the organizational factors. It's for the organization to decide, rather than, it's a process the organization also need to decide, rather than the individual to decide. So it's an individual model and de-emphasize unsystematic clinical experience. So it's kind of move people away from the apprenticeship model, from the my supervisor set model. I promise I'll be better with this one, because the echoing is hurting my ears. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So, and it start to talk about, you need to look to research. You need to see how people evaluate the practice and what's the outcome, what's the pros and cons, what's the limitation. And then integrate those things into your own practice rather than just what has been always doing and what my supervisor said and what my boss was saying and what I used to do in the last 30 years. So you start talking things about that. Think about in 1994, you start talking about that. It's quite controversial. And then he also talked about, well, we are not asking you to totally ignore what the current practice and what your mentor was saying, what your supervisor saying. But these are classified as external evidence. That means derived from opinions of experts. The internal evidence derived from systematic artifacts or information are basically research. Now, if you talk about it, if you look at 1994, RCT study is becoming to be in print. RCT, we always talk about randomized controlled trial. Actually, it's quite, it's not as old as we think. The formal publication, people start to publish more and more RCT outcomes of RCT trials. It's in the early 90s. So he's talking about these are available. He didn't even talk about RCT at that time in the very early model. But what he talked about systematic artifacts of information, he's talking about information getting from RCT trials. Okay, this is the right button. So he divided the whole process of evidence-based practice into 5 stages. If you look at it, it's very similar to what's printed in the pamphlet. Okay, so basically it's the preparation. Okay, first they select the research to be evaluated for practice implementation. So that's, you have a clinical problem. So his first stage is to select research related to the clinical problem, and that you see whether the research outcome that is worthwhile to integrate into your own research. Validation, appraise findings of the research. Comparative evaluation, decision making about change or not change, or using the own method, or integrated wherever there is reported, new findings that's reported, and the evidence is trustworthy, is reliable, and whether you still also have to consider whether it's fit for implementing the research finding in your own setting, okay? And feasibility of implementation. Well, randomized controlled trial is very nicely done, but whether it's feasible in your setting, whether your organization can allow you to do it, and whether you have the financial, and of course, whether you have the necessary expertise to integrate the new findings. Evaluation of the current practice, okay? And you need to have a very honest evaluation of your own current practice, whether there's a need for change. And then the next step is translation, application, devising how to integrate. And then the evaluation. So that's the very first, the very first documented evidence-based model that was reported. And then, so people are very, very, very diligently, these are the small steps. In each stage, in each phase, preparation, validation, there's small steps that you can follow, okay? For example, the preparation is search for and select sources of research and supplementary evidence. So in this model, they add on, as first it was very preliminary, and then later on they add on more and more information. So there's more revision. The 2001 include all these sub-steps into all these, phases. But then, given that people, you still hear people talk about the Stetler model, but not as often as the others. So let's move to another grandfather model that people stop talking about, But it's good to know, okay? This model shifts from also intuition-driven practice to implement evidence-based practice changes into practice. It also includes 6 phases. Okay, this is the 6 phases. Assess the need for change in your practice. Link your problem intervention and outcome. Synthesize the best evidence and design your practice change. Implement and evaluate change in practice. And integrate and maintain changes in your practice. So basically, again, identify your problem, search for evidence, decide whether there's a need for change, a need for integration. Wherever it is, design your practice according to whatever you've been searching on, whatever you decide, and then integrate or not integrate them, and then communicate recommended change to stakeholders. I think this is what we call also taking the organizational process into consideration. So you need to talk to your stakeholders. Stakeholders include what? Client, policymakers, and ministry level people, and your board, your organizational boss, the hospital, if you're a hospital administrator. So communicate recommended change to stakeholders, present. So you're not the only, so after making a decision, you also need to present staff in service education in your change, okay? Get an idea of, further modification, and also get a sense of acceptance in your new integration, okay? And then integrate the practice, so you get the acceptance and then the recognition from the stakeholder and from your peers that you are integrating your changes into your practice. And if the outcome is favorable, then integrate into standards of practice. So after trying out, so nowadays we probably hear this very popular term, best practice standards. Okay, this is where it comes from. So when you integrate your evidence, then you deliver, you find favorable outcomes, you refine it, and then write it into standards. So the other people, when they search for evidence, standards is one form of evidence that you have to also consider, okay? And monitor the process and outcome. So although people are not talking about this model anymore, but some of the concepts been, at that time been quite innovative. And then it was integrated to later on. So this is just a graphic description of what we're talking about just now. Right button this time. Definition of questions and development research strategy, acquisition, selection of paper, appraisal, research studies, quality, weighing the evidence, development of design recommendation, implementation and evaluation of design decisions. Okay, so this model also applied to evidence-based research. Okay, so right button. So Iowa model, I think people are still talking about it. It meant to be a theoretical model. It kind of organizes our thinking and help determine next steps, okay? And although it's a theoretical model, it has been shown to be successful in several settings for guiding your design of EBP. Let's look at this one. Now this model focuses more on the triggers. Okay, so if you remember the earlier model, they start off with there's a problem, okay, and there's a preparation. This model adds to it, how do you trigger there's a problem, okay? What is a trigger? Set an EBP inquiry emotion. What is the trigger that makes you think you need an evidence-based practice in order to manage the clinical problem or the problem? Okay, so are the evidence to change practice sufficient? Do you have sufficient evidence for you to consider changing your current practice or adding new things to your current practice? Are findings across study consistent? Are the type and quality of findings sufficient? So all this they talk about, these are the triggers which later on in our model integrate a big process in the assessment of evidence. Okay? Particularly it's important now, especially for nowadays, this process is very important because the overload of information. So we don't just Google whatever people's doing. Okay, there are a lot of self-help tips and hot tips and how you can manage a certain condition. For example, if internet addiction, you search for the web page, the thousands coming up. These are the information. How do we weigh? Okay, they report. For example, we just had mentioned the boot camp has been very favorable for some of the people in treating addiction, internet addiction problem for youngsters. What are the evidence? Okay, that this web page, that this is a method to deal with it. So if we don't search for evidence for this effectiveness of boot camp for treating internet addiction in high school children, then we might not be, running, very dangerous practice that is not based on concrete evidence. So this whole thing is probably asks us to focus more on assessment of evidence. It's not just this new form of management, a new form of practice coming up, then we adopt it. We have to wait for evidence, weighing the pros and cons. So this model emphasizes on the assessment phase of the evidence. Next button. Begins assessment, so it also divides the whole process into 5 stages. And it begins with assess the practice, begins with a trigger, develop a question, what is not working and what is working, what do you want to know about? Okay. And decide what resources are available. Okay, even if you decide you need to change or you need to add in something, what resources are available, what has worked in other places and what has not worked in other places. And how can one change the practice, okay? And make a plan to change based on relevant, applicable information and do the intervention and then evaluate, okay? And then also emphasize how well is the process working for stakeholders, okay? So it also come up with phases, decision trees that we can follow. This is the assessment phase, decision phase, planning phase, implementation phase, evaluating phase. Okay, the length of the bar doesn't represent the time that you spend on it. Okay, sometimes the implementation may be very long. Okay, it's just that the initial decision is quite important. So, for example, the problem-focused trigger. So you look at the risk management data, the process data, internal, external benchmark data, financial data, what's the cost of this kind of practice, and what's the manpower resources that's required. So all these helps you to make the decision tree whether the external focus trigger is the topic a priority for the organization. Okay, so this is very important. So for example, if we're school setting, we want to do some things, for example, I think in our institution, every 5 years there's a new learning model. We begin with e-learning and blended learning. Now they're into future learning. So if the organization priority is always easier, I don't know whether it's easier top down, the organization said you have to do e-learning. Everyone has to start blended learning. Everyone has to do future learning. or we propose there. Now, when top-down resources, okay, is it made available? So the first few years that we were, like later on, we were human beings, so we will also have all these barriers. It's like traditional one-way interaction in lecture, and you talk about blended learning, which include a lot of interactive. There were criticism that are you asking us to do a show? It's like you're making a show there. And blended learning include a lot of video things. And then that means that we have more resources making videos and sourcing. And we are not doing unless the financial support. So they give 5,000 Sing dollar for hiring an RA for us to agree to do the blended learning. So this is what is organizational stakeholder priority. So the financial implication will be easier if it's top down. Usually they want to ask you to do things. They will provide some support to you. Sometimes it might be necessary to bottom up, okay, that we propose to the organization. And that's a very difficult journey, I would say. Yeah. So, but anyway, so let's say if it's the topic priority, yes, form a team. Then you start a team to talk about all the looking. Then you have the resources, searching for all the evidence, and then designing on your intervention program. So this model emphasizes you need a team. Okay, so it's very different from the first model that we look at. It's an individual basis. This one, wherever you decide, you form a team to discuss. Okay. So I think in social work, in psychology, in clinical psychology, we very focused. We talk more and more about, in medicine, we talk about case conferences, okay? They present case and people talk about different things. Then if you have an idea, then you need to talk about everyone make the decision, okay? And sometimes in some countries, in medical conference, they also invite the relative or the patient themselves. Okay, of course, for certain clinical problems, okay? So, for example, if you have a very early on stage of cancer, there are 10 different ways of dealing with it. So which way, okay? So it's not just the individual medical doctor nowadays. In most of the countries, you need a case discussion and then also involve the relative to decide. Okay, based on what do you decide? It's not evidence, okay? So that is the Iowa model. How much time do I have? Is it going too fast? No? Okay, 1 more hour. So I intend to leave about 10 or 15 minutes for discussion. So next one is the ACE model. There's still people talking about it again. It's talking about the knowledge transformation, okay? The focus is how you translate the research finding into your evidence-based practice. So it's 5 stages. So you can say each model has different emphasis. Stage 1, knowledge discovery, evidence summary, translation into practice recommendation, implementation into practice evaluation. Again, they use the diagram. It's a STAR model. It's simple, easy to understand, so people are still using it. A STAR start with discovery is one way, it's not circle. Okay, circle, you can start anywhere. But this STAR model starts from discovery of, research, then discover the problem, or it's a clinical problem that you locate a clinical problem, evidence summary, go to translation into guidelines or standards, practice, integrate all this into your practice, and process outcome evaluation. Okay, this is a STAR model. People start not using it, although they mention it. They will use the model. Most people, I would say, use the model that included in your handbook. Okay, and this is a model that is been from John Hopkins. They have entire center working on this particular thing. And they reported every single study that's evidence-based, they have to deposit over there, and the evaluator is indeed, then they put it up. Okay, so you can go into Johns Hopkins nursing department. There's a particular place for putting all the evidence-based practice research, outcome research over there. And they have, later on, they have toolkits and forms for you to, how to, answer clinical questions and things like that. Very elaborate, and huge amount of resources was available there, okay? I saw somewhere they recently received another endowment to do this evidence-based practice. They are very, very, very advanced, okay? So 2007 is a problem-solving approach to, where is the button? No battery. Now I learned how to use the button. Okay, here. A problem-solving approach to practice decision-making within an organization. So they're not talking about the individual therapists. They're talking about individual therapists or therapists working in an organization. And it's a problem-solving. So you start with a problem, and then when we are doing problem-solving approach, there's ask questions and decisions, another question, another decision, another question. Okay, problem-solving. Integrate the best available scientific evidence with the best available patient and practitioner evidence. Consider internal, external inferences. We go very quickly because there's a couple of slides down there to illustrate these points. Encourage critical thinking in application of evidence to the care of the client. Includes practice, education, and research. This model is developed in the nursing department of Johns Hopkins Medical School, but it was heavily utilized in social science, in social work, sociology, business, education, and psychology. So basically, you also, when you look at Johns Hopkins model, they always give you a triangle, because that model focuses on practice, research, and education. Okay, equally, it's a what do you call this triangle? There's a name I forgot, totally forgot. I learned in secondary school. What is it? The equals, what is it? So this, you know what I mean? Okay, equal length, okay, not. So equally important is education, practice, and research. Okay, they add on the education part, as you can tell. Okay, so internal factors influence education and practice, particularly is more so of the practice. So what internal factor influence your practice? The cultural environment, the equipment that's available, the staff effectiveness, what is the standards that's available, and also what kind of standard you're supposed to comply with. For example, that talks that not only in, now wrong button, so fast. Wrong button, okay. The standards, okay. We, in social science, or even in medicine, this standard is not only refer to standard in the practice, standard in your organization, you also refer to cultural standard. For example, if we are designing a prevention program for elder abuse or child abuse, what is the standard for caring of elderly? In different culture, in different society, it's different. So if you hold one standard and then apply to all society and all countries and culture, it is not working. So this standards is standard of your practice. What's the current standard of your practice? If everybody was using drug treatment for this particular condition, and you are asking for a holistic treatment, then you weigh off the standard and what is the opinion of your colleagues, okay? And also refer to standard of your organization. For example, if you're working in a religious organization, there are certain things they would not allow you to do, or they would encourage you to do. And then the different cultures and different communities. And then there are external factors, accreditation, core measures, legislation, okay, and licensing, standards, regulations, okay. So there are things that you want to do, but the regulation does not allow you to do, okay. So these are very, we can say these are more subjective. These are more very objective, okay. Laws and license, they're written into, black and white. So these are very objective external factors. These are internal factors tend to be a little bit subjective, amenable to change as well. Okay, in order to change licensing or legislation, it takes a very long time. Okay, to change the organization acceptance, it might be taking less time than changing a legislation. So they're talking about internal factor influencing more so on your practice, but it also kind of influences your education. So in my times, master degree in clinical psychology is the terminal degree, but nowadays it's not enough. So internal, external factors, particularly internal factors also influence your education. External factors also influence your research, okay? Research, there's different ways of doing research, and I probably would not have enough time to go into details. It's these different types of research, but the handbook gives nice examples of, I think I remember, okay. It's included there, what is experimental, quasi-experimental, non-experimental research, and qualitative. This type of research use different levels of reliability in your evidence, which we'll talk about next workshop, next Friday. And then research is, of course, important in influencing our practice, research, and education. But there are also other non-research factors: organization experience, quality improvement, financial data, clinical experience, and patient preference. Now, EPP has also very emphasis on patient values. Okay, if it's an informed patient, but we have to, also quantify that it's an informed person or informed relative in order for them to participate in our decision making. So they have to possess all the necessary information in order to participate in a meaningful decision making in our EBP. So next slide. Now, John Hopkins model also look at questions, asking a question, your practice learning. This PET, practice question, evidence, translation, a lot. We will take it out to discuss detail. And next workshop, we'll even talk more about it. Because you see, this is a part and parcel of all the of this John Hopkins model of EBP. So this practice and learning is an essential part. And then integrate them together, then you have the best practice, and then your practice improvement, both in clinical, learning, and operational. Now, PET, I think some of us know, but let's also refresh our memories. Okay, PET process of John Hopkins model is practice, question, evidence, and translation. They are developing so elaborate, the different forms for us to work. So when they do EPP, they're very elaborate. If you look at one of the examples of the EPP, research reports, there are a lot of forms to fill out. And we probably would not be going into that extreme, okay? But this is good way of guiding our thinking and guiding us to start thinking how to use EPP in our actual practice. The P represents the pickle, okay? This itself, next week we'll go into detail. Practice questions include the questions about the patient and the information about the type of intervention that you intend to use, and then comparison of the intervention that you intend to use, and then also your desired outcome. So PICO within the process of practice question. And next week, we'll talk more about it. We'll give you an example to illustrate how this pickle works. And then E represent evidence. Evidence, you need an exhaustive and educated literature search, and team appreciation and recommendation. Okay, so it's a team decision of what is the best evidence to integrate into your practice. And then the last process is translation. Okay, people sometimes, I think early on, people were asking, you missed the evaluation process here. But they said, we'll include it here. Translation also self-include. Decide whether and how to interchange, evaluate the implementation, and communicate the findings. So the translation is not just applying whatever you decide to change and deliver a service or deliver a program. It also, according to John Hopkins' model, it includes evaluation as well as communicate the findings. That means publications, dissemination of information. So that is what they consider as PET. And next week we'll talk more about that. But the central construct, another model, okay, so we move to another model, ARCC. As you see, it's a very, keep revising. It's assessment of organizational culture and readiness for EBP, okay? You can see the model moved from individual more and more to the organization. Identification of strengths and barriers of the organization, as well as practitioners working in that organization. Development and use of EBP mentors. EBP implementation, outcome evaluations, okay? This is a graphic examples of ARCC model, assessment of organizational culture and readiness, include potential strength and presence, and what is the fit? So what is the organization's thought about EBP? How do they accept it? Any administrative support, presence of any mentors and champions, okay? And identification of strength for major barriers. So you have to look at the organization, first evaluate themselves with what are the strengths that facilitate the EBP implementation in the organization, or what are the barriers, potential barriers. Most people will identify that at this stage, the mentoring of EBP is not mentoring how they do it. This mentoring is different from our mentor before the EBP. It's the mentoring of how people do EBP. And inadequate EBP knowledge and skills and lack of EBP valuing. Move on. Okay, see, this model is also from a nursing department. They talk about if we substitute nurses into practitioners' belief about the value of EBP and ability to implement the EBP process. I think one of the very important for delivery, particularly in psychotherapy, I can do it, thank you. Just like you, APM psychomotor retardation. Okay, so let's move to this one. Okay, just like psychotherapy, if you don't believe that people can change, there's no point in delivering psychotherapy. If you don't believe that your program or whatever you have ideas is useful, it's valid, no point in doing it. Just like when we all said, you want to do branded learning. Is it working? Probably not working. Then do not do it. So that's why we said this is one of the major barriers. If the one who's delivering the program just pay lip service, have no faith no faith that it works, there is no point in doing it. So the value system, what is your value? What is your thinking about EBP? Is it just good on writing report, good to produce a paper? Is it really working for our client? So we have to tell ourselves it's working for our client if we do it the right way. If we do it according to what people recommend us to do, if we do it according to what all these models suggest us to do, okay? So we talk about the value of this one. And then all this, we talk about the outcome, elaborate the outcome. So of course, we will want to improve patient outcome, whatever the outcome is. They're not just happy with the process, but the problem really is get improved, okay? And decrease hospital costs, because we always believe that if you treat deliver this program, it's going to be cost effective, okay? In the long run, it reduces the problem, okay? In the bigger number of people, okay? So in the long run, it will decrease the medical costs, the practitioner satisfaction, cohesion within the profession, because we have all these steps, this BPT to follow, so there's less disagreement as to whether what you're doing is indeed effective or not effective. And because we all evaluate the evidence and less disagreement, we work together because this model, all the more recent model emphasize on teamwork. So we all come up to a decision. So it's more cohesive within the practitioner, within the professions, okay? So intent to leave is decreased. So we have less like burnout, okay? We all know about the term, less staff turnover and less burnout with the professional burnout. So this is what the model is suggesting, okay? Now, there's table 5 in the book, the nice summary of all these models, okay? So basically, the IOMA model is very elaborate. Sorry about the mic, okay? So as you can see, the IOMA model is very elaborate. And wherever the models that you look at is very similar. So that's why I have a slide earlier on, the major components of all these models, okay? So these are a very nice slide summarizing all this. Now comes to this model. Most people nowadays, when they do EBP, they use this model because it's easy to understand, okay? So they start with ask, assess, appraise, apply. The one that I'm looking at is assess. In the handbook is what? Evaluate, right? Appraise, okay? So a different wording, but it basically, again, okay? So this assess is the reaching out. This one, assess, is evaluate, okay? So basically, again, this simplified evidence practice model, it's difficult to find out who first draw up this diagram, okay? Everyone is copying somebody else. So it's very difficult, to find out who first draw up this. But this is the most popular one. And when people talking about evidence-based model, evidence practice model, they list out these 5. It's easy to understand. Formulate available clinical question or formulate an answerable question, track down the best evidence, appraise the evidence for its validity and usefulness, apply the evidence with your clinical expertise and your client value and local conditions. and evaluate the effectiveness of the process. I think another important phase is to report. Okay, there are various centers that collect all the evidence-based practice, outcome reports. So because we evaluate other people's research, okay, some of the research may not be evidence-based, but they provide evidence that if this component is indeed effective, that is our role to apply those research findings into evidence-based practice. After applying, whether it's result good or bad, you have to report to the depository or clearinghouse. And in UK, they also had a clearinghouse. And I forgot today, but next week, I saw it, I looked at it, it's very good. I will talk more about those clearinghouse. If after you do an evidence-based practice, you write up the report, you send to the clearinghouse, and they will evaluate whether you indeed follow whatever you are talking about, okay, the evidence-based procedure. And typically they ask you to specify what model are you following in terms of delivering this EBP practice, okay, EB practice. And after they satisfy that you're indeed evidence-based practice, and indeed that's the outcome. So it doesn't matter whether your outcome is as desired or you unfortunately you don't find what you desire. They still will put your report up there. And they have a list later on, in next workshop, I will show you, there's a list of evidence-based best practice of different clinical problems and different social problems, different behavioral problems. That's in the UK clearinghouse. It's the best guideline clearinghouse, okay? So based on all this, they write up best guideline for medical practice and for other disciplines as well. So it's very elaborate, that website, and I think some of you are very already familiar with. Okay, so we are introduced to so many models. Which model to use? There are the criteria to evaluate the EBP model because before we decided to do EBP, the very first decision is which model we are following. And my suggestion, other than this, use the latest model. Use the latest model and use a simple one. So it does, even if it's so, okay, the John Hopkins model is very good, but in reality, in most of the setting, we can't do it. Okay, maybe in an institutional setting, we can do it. In a very bigger setting, and when the organization is acceptable, you can do it. But if you're frontline, ask some of our frontline clinicians, they probably would not follow, some of the evidence-based, they know they need to do it, but they might not be able to follow through. So if we are going to choose one that is clear, simple to follow, and easy for other people, for non-practitioners, for non-expert people in your field that can understand. Because whatever we want to decide a new practice, we have to deliver to our administrator to get their support if that's necessary, or deliver to our team head. Most of the time, the team head is within our discipline, but if we're asking for more resources, a change of practice guideline, for example, the best guideline for treating trauma is 12 sessions, when usually your clients is only allowed for 8 sessions, subsidized 8-session therapy. Then if you want to change to 12 sessions subsidized, then you have to present to those who are holding the purse string, okay? So that's something that I would choose. So this on paper said you criteria to evaluate the EBP model for use is on paper, but when reality selecting a model for your actual EBP is what elements of the EBP model are important to the organizations. Okay, are they focused on the client outcome? Okay, so when you evaluate the best evidence, then you have to put more weight on those evidence that produce the best client outcome. Okay, so that's something that we have to consider. Which model will focus on the client outcome? And is the model useful for all situations of population or specific to the organization? Has the model been tested and disseminated regional and cultural relevance? Is the model easy to use? And who will be the users of the model? Do we need to train people? Need for trainers of the EBP models, okay? I guess that's what we are doing, trainers of trainers, okay? So this is the way to go for selecting a model. So after talking so much, I can go back. So let's disturbance to the slide. 820. So what is it good about EBP? Okay, why is not that we have to use EBP? Why can't we just follow whatever we taught in school and whatever that we've been practicing for the last year or last 2 years? Well, actually, it provides better information for practitioners, shared decision making that we talk about. So in the entire process, we know a lot more about the problem and what you getting the evidence. We know a lot more about what others are doing with that in relation to that particular clinical problem or clinical question. And we also had more opportunity to share our decision making and enable consistency of care and reduce variations. So it's not something that, it will be the care wherever you go, wherever is one practitioner left, another coming in, or another group, you go to another setting, then another people doing differently. So if EBP, people follow EBP, there will be more consistency. If they evaluate the evidence, they also, so find consensus that this evidence is good, then there's more. So people tend to come up with the general guidelines and best practice to follow, and reduce variation, better client outcome. And whether this is the case is not very convincing as now, unfortunately, because it's just that it's not enough, at least in psychology, it's just that there's not enough evidence about EBP in psychotherapy, in psychology. A lot of people are doing therapy, but a lot of people are claiming to do EBP, but very few dare to submit the report to be scrutinized. So whether it's better client outcome when doing EBP, I wouldn't say at least for psychology, we cannot be very confident. Not that it's not good, but we need reports that submit to us that verify that they indeed do the EBP, But unfortunately, there's not enough in our own discipline. I think the same as social work. Surprisingly, nursing have even more documentation than medical doctors. Nurses are very, very hardworking in producing research output. So this is something that we wish for when conducting EBP. That's better client outcome, provide client-focused cure. So in that sense, we focusing more on the client's problem in relation to many other things. But the focus is still on what is best for the client in terms of what has been done to be the best for the clients. And structured process. As a result of EBP, there's increasing number of standards and best guidelines available. So basically, for most of the common problems, for example, in our case, depression, there are many best practice guideline for different situations, different level, different conditions of depression, and different standards for treating depression. Next week, I'll give you an example about some of the best guidelines. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, and step care. So the step care concept in medical setting is also very popular. It's also based on EPP practice, okay? So structured process, increase confidence in decision making. So we are not flipping the coin, okay, head and tail, okay. We are based our decision on evidence, generalized information. So because we look at all the evidence, integrate into our practice, and disseminate the information. And when we choose the EPP model, we advise to choose a model that can generalize our findings to not just that group of clients, to not just that setting, okay? So this also enables us to, by looking at one report, we are more able to generalize what they have done into our setting. Contribute to science of practice in various disciplines. So particularly in social science, it positions ourselves as a social study, as a study of social phenomena, social behavior in a scientific way. It's not, something that is subjective, cannot be verified. It's not your guess is my guess, something like that. So it's better position as social science as a discipline with scientific methodology and scientific thinking, and be consistent across different observations. Provide guidelines for future research, okay? So from the EPP, now all this is only possible when the EPP is reported, disseminated. When you do EPP, but you just do it your own without letting other people, reporting to other people, nobody knows, okay? So all this is only possible with the dissemination of your EPP results and the process. And if this done, it will provide best practice guidelines for us to easier to write standards, for people to follow, and help practitioners to provide high quality client care, improve quality, effectiveness, and appropriateness of practice. This is what is in mind. But there are barriers in BP. It is huge barriers, much more than this. And I think there's always a debate. Practice is different from research. Research is, as if research and practice is two separate things. And also researchers and practitioners are very different persons. It's true. It's, and if you talk to researchers, they have a different thinking about practitioner. Practitioner have different thinking about researcher. And if you talk about practice, service delivery, research, unless you are in an academic setting, research is typically downplayed. If you're working in a service-oriented setting, like a hospital, if you talk about the administrator or whatever consultant over there, that we want to conduct the research, they are very skeptical about research because practice service delivery is always the priority in most of the setting employing practitioner, okay? And they value the practitioners' the ability to deliver the service, whatever they deliver, as long as they deliver the service, okay? And no major events happen, no major aversive event, they are happy enough. So unless you are in an institution that is going for academic teaching hospital or academic teaching clinic, or a hospital that aim for innovative new thing, then they will be putting a more heavy value on research. So evidence-based research is much accepted, but EPP itself typically is downplayed Okay, just do it. So don't talk about research. Just as long as the client don't complain, as long as we can give the statistics that we're treating so many patients at so many times, then they are happy enough. So lack of value for research in most of our frontline practice or in clinical practice. And together with that, there's also lack of researchers or mentors, trainers in EBP in this type of settings. Okay, if you go to a hospital, not a teaching hospital, and ask the medical doctor in any team, who is doing EBP? People will frown on you. Nobody is doing it. Okay, they know the term, but they probably, they can list the five steps, but are they doing it? They say, we're doing it, but perhaps not in a systematic way. Okay, so lack of value, difficulty in bringing the change. Also is that because EPP, we're talking about most of the time, we make a decision of adding elements or changing the current practice. It's dangerous. Changing any element in your practice is dangerous. Okay, so even though you say it's evidence-based, but it's people, don't rock the boat. Okay, just do whatever it's doing now. Okay, so difficulty in bringing the change in your practice. Okay, and lack of administrative support. It's difficult enough to get your support from within your profession. Okay, and it's even more difficult to get support from your administrator. Okay, they again, status quo, no major, in a hospital setting, no major medical situation, adverse event happen. That's the goal, the benchmark, okay, is not evidence-based practice, okay, for most hospitals or most service delivery settings. And like I said, lack of knowledge and EPP mentors and lack of time for research. Now, it takes time, okay, when a clinical problem comes, you have to evaluate, source out the evidence, evaluate evidence, take a team meeting and design the program. It takes time, okay? It's easy to just, I heard it somewhere, that adding this component, adding social skill training to the autistic program for treating autistic is good. Then I just add on it. Okay, it's easy to do that. But if you are searching for evidence and have a team meeting, then it takes time. Okay, not that it's not good. Indeed, if most people are saying that adding this element is good for your research, good for your practice, you add to it. It's a form of evidence-based, but on external evidence, on the expert's opinion. It's part of our evidence. Okay. So lack of time for going through all the entire EPP process, and particularly so lack of time of disseminating the results. Okay. And most of all, our service delivery result is that the clients are not coming back for psychotherapy. I think very few of us have a client even have a very simple 3-item scale asking client satisfaction. The benchmark of success in psychotherapy is they're not coming back. So it's difficult to lack of time for research, lack of time for evaluation, and lack of time for documentation, and lack of time for dissemination. Okay. Lack of knowledge about research. I don't think this is a good reason now. If you look at medical doctors, nurses, all the allied professionals, social science, they have too much research information. If you look at undergrad training, research is almost a compulsory model that you have to take. Basically, all those who go through university training nowadays in social science, business, education, allied health, they will have a course or two in research, particularly in statistics, research design, in different focus. Okay, so you cannot claim nowadays lack of knowledge about research. It's just that I think the others, but like I said, the problem is what you learn in school is going to be useless 5 years from now on, at this point of time. When I was a graduate student, I don't know what meta-analysis is. I don't know what randomized trial is. So a structural modeling equation, things like that. It's all self-learned. We don't. So even you're taught about that. So we do not have time to polish our research knowledge. Having said that, lack of knowledge is no excuse, but another reason is we don't have time to polish research skills, okay? So when there is workshop on professional skills, people would jump to sign up. When they were talking about multivariate analysis, structural equation, only the academics come. Very few practitioners come up. Because if they have time to pick up new skills, they will pick up practice skills. So there's a priority to update the information about practice skills, about latest information, about what's good, but there's no time for update the information in assessing the evidence. So that was the problem, the barrier. So if you don't do that, then you just, by word, you slot in a component to your practice and then make the decision to deliver it, okay? So complexity of research reports is one thing that's very, very true. More and more nowadays, even I myself need to read in order to understand the research reports. And so I keep asking my students, don't show me the equation. They show me very sophisticated, just like the models. I said, what's the outcome? Okay, just tell me the outcome. Okay, and whether this is moderation, mediation, or whatever, just tell me, has the client improved? Did the symptoms subsided? Okay, what are the factors influencing? What did you find in this? Is it adding this social skill component indeed help the autistic child function better in school? That's my ultimate question. I don't know. I don't care about how all this sophisticated report comes up. So the complexity research reports and lack of knowledge about EBP. Hopefully, people are more and more trainers going up and more support for this type of practice. And then other concerns, okay, that's more and more concern. Too much focus on EBP. EBP, evidence-based practice, does not mean manualized practice in terms of, or we just follow the guidelines, we follow the best standard, okay? So there's a concern which is very valid. Too much focus on EBP would result in cookbook care and loss of art of intervention therapy. So too much focus on EBP would be the therapist as an individual kind of minimize the therapist as individual during the process of implementing the practice. I give you an example, the problem with all this. Treating depression, the evidence-based practice for treating depression, we're talking about mild depression, is cognitive behavioral therapy. There's tons of manuals about how to do it. Because one of the hallmark of evidence-based is that people document what they are doing, and these are the elements that's useful. So a lot of manual, very good manual, okay, produced by very top evidence-based researchers, academia, and practitioners. So students in training, okay, I've been training clinical students, they look at this as, with no offense to religion, they look at it as a Bible. So I remember this example very vivid. So for our training, they need to come up and they go out to internship. Every week, every other week, they have to come for a case presentation so that everybody discuss the case with all the confidential information, taking out of it. So this student was very proud. Okay, my client, I treat the client, depressed client for, I'm treating very successful. And within 4 sessions, I can do the 24 chapters on the manual. I said, huh? 4 sessions, 24 chapters. Okay, let's talk about what do you do in the first section? I do 4 chapters already. I can do 6 chapters. Then I said, and then he keep talking about what he's doing. For all of you who know CPT, know, they're they're doing diaries and whatever, and change the condition, whatever. I said, okay, stop. I said, can you remember? I cannot ask for my colleagues because they saw too many clients. But colleagues, they are not seeing too many. Okay, I said, do you remember what this is? Is this a woman? Yes. Okay. What color, is she wearing a dress? She's sitting down. I did not know because she's sitting, because it's a hospital setting, they sit, I did not know because she's sitting and the table was obstructing. Then do you remember she's long hair or short hair? I did not know. So it was, when she goes, did she call you Dr. Chen or Mr. Chen? Is a male student. Dr. Chen or Mr. Chen, or did she say anything? I did not remember. So it was, of course, this is, you might say I'm too picky. And of course the student was so depressed, and right outside the classroom said, indeed, Prof. Tang is a killer. Manualized codebook best practice guideline is good, but if you take too literally, it dehumanizes the client as well as the therapist. The art aspect is the human relationship, the human observation. That I don't think they write in the guidelines you need to see, you need to observe what the client's dressing, things like that. But depression is a very important observation. What do they dress? Is it dressing overdressed, too much in hot weather? Or, are they well kept? Are they, combing their hair and whatever? So all this is too much focus on EPP will result in codebook care and loss of art, particular loss of flexibility as situation arises. Another case is that typically student will be at a loss when the client said, they will immediately call the supervisor. My client reports suicidal idea, but the codebook did not tell me what to do. So it's lack of flexibility. Okay, and then for frontline service, the best guidelines are this 6 sessions, 7 sessions. Okay, in almost 10 years ago, the Australian best practice guideline for treating traumatized patient is 12 to 24 sessions. And then the insurance company, based on this, that's the next one, is that only reimburse 18 sessions, because 12 to 24, okay, I've been nice enough, our company is nice enough, so I only reimburse patient up to 18 sessions. So this kind of practice guideline sometimes becomes, individual. If based on EPP, you have to take into consideration of patient's characteristics and the values and the situations. Okay, the guideline you need to be flexible. But some people say this guideline I taken off from EPP. Okay, it's 12 sessions. Even if I do EPP, I note, I have to take into consideration a client characteristic, but I wasn't allowed to see patient beyond 24 sessions. Sometimes for some setting, even the client want to pay, they cannot pay. Okay, it's true. So it becomes very inflexible. Okay, because the EPP tells us to do this. And EPP, when I design the EPP, it's this way. Based on I follow the best practice guideline in implementing my practice. Okay, I do all the ask, assess, and decision. I decide to take this best guideline and integrate into my practice. And then that's the problem of being inflexible and losing the art aspect. I won't say it's the art aspect, probably the human aspect of all this practice, of this service delivery. Not all practices can or should be based on science per se. I don't know what this sentence means, but I guess it's true that EBP is not a cure for all types of practice. It's recommended a situation allows feasible. It's recommended to use. Of course, there are some situations that we cannot use this one. We should. It's not meant for all service deliverers should based on EBP. But if situation allows, and if we consider all of the conditions, it's something that we recommend to do it. Right? So, good. There's some more to do. So basically, this is a background of all the conceptual models, and that gives you an idea where those 5 R's, those simplified models come from. Okay, so next workshop or next seminar will be next Friday, translating research evidence into practice, which will probably go in. I choose particularly the John Hopkins, who are a very elaborate model, and map it into the 5 the simplified model, and how if every situation is conducive, how we could do it. Okay, and so just do not have a false hope. You won't have. If we have time, we'll do some exercise. Okay, but if not, then we'll just go through whatever need to do. Okay, so I have then 15 minutes for discussion and reflection and clarification and sharing.